In spring of 2020, we found ourselves in the midst of a pandemic that happens every century or so. School was canceled from spring break through the end of the year, and most places closed down. But you know what didn't close down? The parks. And since I'm a little bit crazy, I decided I needed to do something in my newfound free time instead of sitting at home and watching YouTube. Starting March 22nd, 2020, I set out on a mission to visit every state park in Iowa. A few disclaimers. I like to say all because 54 is the amount of DNR-owned pieces of land in Iowa that end in state park. While state recreation areas are technically state parks, I am a hiker and I wasn't really going to find any trails at state recreation areas because they are mostly composed of boat ramps and campgrounds. I have a kind of contrarian mindset. Whenever someone says you can't do this, I immediately try and figure out a way around it or a way to prove them wrong, which is why I wanted to find places to go during the pandemic. I interacted with hardly anyone and only stopped at places to fill up with gas, for the most part. There are also a number of parks in Iowa that are called state parks but are managed by the county they are in. I didn't go to those either. I also get constant suggestions from people who tell me that I should visit all the national parks later in life. While this would be cool, I wouldn't be opposed to doing it, I enjoy the state parks more because they offer subtle differences between them, much less crowds, but they maintain the same consistency of national parks. What I mean by that is, if I were to go to every city park in Des Moines, for example, I would have some parks that I would have to spend the day there, while some I would just show up and see the whole park. The state parks, there is almost always some exploring you have to do when you get there. My goal for life would be to visit every state park in the United States, which is why I'm not as keen on national parks. For state parks, I would be the first person to do so ever. A few shoutouts I want to give. My parents are awesome, and I thank them for being chill enough during the pandemic to let me do this. Some of my friends were not so lucky. Although I don't like her quite as much now, thank you to the Iowa governor for keeping most of the state open throughout the pandemic. I couldn't have done it if there was a shutdown. Also, thanks to the Iowa DNR for making Iowa state parks free, something that few states do. Now for how this video is going to be structured. I'm going to go over all 54 parks, some in more detail than others, and I'm going to go through them worst to first style. I ranked them 1 to 54, and I'm going to start with 54 and work my way to 1. When I refer to a tier of a park, I have a tier system of S, A, B, C, D, E, F, with F correlating to bad parks, E with okay parks, D with good parks, C with great parks, B with excellent parks, A with amazing parks, and S with parks that are pretty much perfect. I scaled the tiers the way that I did because there aren't too many bad parks in Iowa, and the vast majority of parks are at least good. You will find that each park segment gets longer the later I get in the video, with better and larger parks receiving more details because there's more to talk about that I liked. Here's a map of all the parks I'll be discussing. The parks are marked with stars, and the base map is the Level 4 Ecoregions map from Iowa from the EPA. 2 parks in the same regions will have similar landscapes. The legend is also in the bottom right corner of the screen. I also have this regions map that I will refer to when talking about a park's location. With that, let's get into the parks. Starting with number 54, Clear Lake. My least favorite park takes us to north central Iowa. Clear Lake State Park is a 55-acre park located on the shores of Clear Lake, just outside of the town of Clear Lake. The park contains just over a mile of trails, which would normally push it up a bit in the ranks, but when we visited, we couldn't hike any of them because of the amount of mayflies present at the lake. The view at the lake was also the least natural of any lakeshore park in north central Iowa, with virtually all of Clear Lake being surrounded by residential properties. I can see this park resonating with campers in midsummer as it had a decent-sized campground, but as a hiker, this state park was my least favorite. 53. Trappers Bay. Driving 2.5 hours west of Clear Lake, we arrive at Trappers Bay State Park in the town of Lake Park, Iowa. This park is only 57 acres and contains no hiking trails. However, there were also no hordes of mayflies. This park primarily serves as a boat ramp for fishers in the town of Lake Park. The park surrounds the Trappers Bay area of Silver Lake, one of about 30 glacially formed lakes in Iowa. The combination of having no trails and it being the furthest park from my house at 222 miles led this park being the second worst on my list. 52. Twin Lakes. Heading 2 hours south and a little bit east of Trappers Bay, we find Twin Lakes State Park. This is a 15-acre park on North Twin Lake and is just north of Highway 20 west of Fort Dodge. There really wasn't a lot to do here. It just had some picnic tables and a playground. That was pretty much it. It does have a 6 or 7 mile bike trail that does go all the way around the lake, but it's not a part of the park and only links up to it. To the park's credit, it seems like a popular place. When I went there, every picnic table was filled and the lake was hopping with boats. 51. Mcintosh Woods. Returning northeast to Clear Lake, we find the second of two parks located on the lake. Mcintosh Woods State Park is a 62-acre park located on Clear Lake's northwest shore. This park was also overrun with mayflies because we went there on the same day as Clear Lake, but not as bad as Clear Lake was. So we actually got to hike a short segment of the 3.5 miles of trails they have there. I imagine this park would go a little higher on the list if we got to hike most of the trails, but that's the way it goes sometimes. I could definitely tell the place was popular because of the amount of people launching boats at the end of the point. 50. Pikes Point. Heading back to the Okaboji area, we arrive at Pikes Point State Park, tied at the smallest state park in Iowa with 15 acres. Pikes Point has no trails and is primarily a picnic spot. It is located on the eastern shore of West Okaboji Lake in the Great Lakes region of Iowa. You'll notice we haven't ventured out of either the north central Iowa or Great Lakes regions at all yet. I don't hate these regions. The parks there are just not great and small, and this isn't all true as you'll see later in this video. The park was nice, no bugs, just small and no trails. That's why it's in the bottom 5. 49. Okamanpedan. Staying in the Great Lakes region, we travel about 40 minutes east to Okamanpedan State Park. This 19-acre park on Okamanpedan Lake is one of the northernmost in Iowa. The lake is not far from the headwaters of the East Des Moines River, which flows south out through the park. The park's only trail is a bridge over the river, which leads out to a small point on the west banks of the river. The park was also rather buggy when we arrived, so we didn't stay long, but it felt more natural than most of the bottom 5 parks. The lake straddles the Minnesota-Iowa border and doesn't contain as many houses as the other lakes mentioned so far. 48. Rice Lake. Our last park before we move south, we have Rice Lake State Park, another 15-acre park just north of the Clear Lake area. This park is on the southern shore of Rice Lake and contains a picnic shelter and some restrooms. While it doesn't sound like much, the atmosphere of the park made up for it, as almost the entire shoreline is void of houses and surrounded by trees, because it's a wildlife management area. The main reasons this park ranked in the F tier was because of the size and the lack of trails. 47. Rock Creek. Traveling 2.5 hours south and east, we arrive at Rock Creek State Park. This park is significantly different from any of the parks I've discussed so far. All of the bottom 7 parks contain less than 100 acres of land. Rock Creek is a 1,700-acre park. It contains almost 9 miles of trails as well. A combination of small factors were what led to this park being in the F tier. First, those 9 miles of trails were all in one line for the most part, no way to loop around the lake. If you hike all 7.8 miles of the main trail, you have to do the same 7.8 miles back. Second, accessing the park was way more difficult than it should have been. It is down some back roads and only has one paved road connecting to it. Most parks have at least 2 or 3 if they're large like this. The paved road had terrible access to the trail, so I wound up going down 2.5 miles of dirt roads to get to a good place to access the trail. I ended up having an amazing view from the parking area and the reservoir of Rock Creek Lake. I hiked down the hill and along the dam to get to the spillway, which isn't the most beautiful in Iowa State Park system, but definitely the most impressive and formidable. Once I got there, I turned around as I didn't think it would get much more interesting than that. The hike totaled 1.3 miles and was a good way to fill part of my day. I was definitely in the part of the park that no one else was in, as the campground was on the other side of the lake, and it was barely 50 degrees that day. It also started raining before I got off of the dirt roads going out of the park. 46. Big Creek. Rounding out the F tier, we have Big Creek State Park, the largest in the Iowa State Park system at 3,550 acres. If I'm being honest, the F tier doesn't really do this park a justice, especially now that I've been there more times. The trail system in this park is lacking, while only having one 3-mile paved trail running the park's length from north to south. This was the main reason I wasn't a fan of the park in the beginning, but the lake is actually quite nice, and I play disc golf there whenever I'm in Des Moines, because it has a good 18-hole course. Big Creek is about 20 minutes north of Des Moines, and is a popular place for families to take their kids for a day. It's also a popular place for the thousands of bikers in Des Moines, with the Neil Smith Trail running right through the park. 45. Walnut Woods. Breaking into the E tier, we have Walnut Woods, a 250-acre park on the Raccoon River in Polk County. It contains a little over 2 miles of trails, and I frequent it as it's the closest state park to my house in Des Moines. This might be the reason it ranks so low. I've always been near it, so it never felt particularly special. It wouldn't be in contention for anything higher than D tier otherwise, but I feel I underrate it a little. Maybe all the parks are just good. This was the second park I did on my mission to get to 54 in 2020, and the day I went there was incredibly gloomy. It was 43 and misting, so the park pictures look very brown. It's got a nice set of trails on the Raccoon River that feel removed from the Des Moines metro area, but are almost in the heart of it. 44. Elinor Bedell. Jumping back up to Okoboji, we have Elinor Bedell State Park, the only state park on East Okoboji Lake. This 80-acre park has about a mile of paved trails that form a loop and a trail through the middle of it. Then there's a half a mile of trail along the lake, which has 2 docks, perfect for any fisherman without a boat. We saw several fish jump. This was the first park on our Okoboji trip that didn't involve plentiful bugs. The Spirit Lake / Okoboji area does a good job at treating parts of the parks so people encounter less bugs. 43. Ledges. Alright, some Central Iowans are going to give me hell for this one, but I will stand my ground. This ranking is partially conditioning from my mom because she thinks Ledges is always overcrowded, which is the first problem with Ledges. All the Des Moines and Ames people flock to Ledges when they want a day to get away from the city, which results in Ledges being a city itself. The park is beautiful, don't get me wrong, but the amount of people definitely takes away from it. The other problem with Ledges is how do I say, its tackiness. The park feels like a national park. The Table Rock there feels like a tourist spot, and the not-so-good-looking chain-link fence around it doesn't help. It's probably like that for functionality, but the standard Iowa DNR wooden beams with stone posts would look so much better. Anyways, the park is impressive, just too many people know about it, and that becomes a problem. We need to better distribute the knowledge of state parks in Iowa. Everyone should know all of their options. That's my main problem with Ledges. There were some other parks where I was worried about this too, but none were anywhere near as bad as Ledges. Ledges is a 1,200-acre park located in Boone County, 45 minutes from Des Moines and 15 minutes from Ames. 42. Lake Manawa. Jumping over to Iowa's western border, we have Lake Manawa, a 1,500-acre park in Council Bluffs. I actually went to this park 3 times, once with my dad, once with my friends, and once with my mom. All were incredibly different. The time I went with my dad was when we went to Council Bluffs so he could run the Wabash Trace Nature Trail, a 62-mile trail across southwest Iowa. He called it the Tri-State Ultra, with him starting in Omaha, running through Council Bluffs to the first trailhead, the trail, and through a tiny rickety town of Blanchard, Iowa to the Missouri border. We did this in the middle of a pandemic, crazy runs in the family. I crewed a large part of the run myself, and it was actually a lot of fun for me. The day we got to Council Bluffs, we needed something to do, so we went to this park. We did the bike trails down by the Missouri River, and we also witnessed a Jeep get stuck in the mud from spring flooding. Most of the hiking in this park is done on the Missouri River, and the lake is mostly for boats. They also have a 1.5-mile paved nature trail that I never did. I took my friends here, and the area we had hiked was completely overgrown. We got several scratches from plants, but it was an adventure. When I took my mom, someone came through there and got rid of all the overgrowth, leaving a nice clean trail. We did another park that day as well. The main reason this park didn't rank so high was just that it was only mediocre in every stat, nothing super impressive, but nothing bad either. 41. Honey Creek, our first park in the southern quarter of the state, and it is the first park in the southeast Iowa region. We have Honey Creek, an 800-acre park on Rathbun Lake. The park's trail system is not very connected, and you have to follow a road to get between any of the trails, a point against the park. Most of the trails are also on the less appealing bay side of the park as well, 2 points against. The thing that saved this park from being in the F tier were the atmosphere and the environment, amount of wildlife, and just overall quietness. The atmosphere of the park is awesome. The park is very lush with green everywhere. The amount of wildlife and quietness also helped with this factor. We saw a bunch of deer, some unique birds. Eastern goldfinch in Iowa isn't as common as you think, and a baby turtle in the road. We weren't worried about it though because nobody was at the park. It was almost sad, a place as awesome as this being neglected. There were a few reasons why it might have been quiet though. First, Honey Creek Resort on the other side of the bay was closed due to the pandemic, which I imagine makes up a lot of the park's traffic. But equally likely is the single-lane closure on the final road to get into the park, which might have turned some people away. We followed the pilot car in and out of the park no problem. The thing that saved this park from being ranked even lower was my mom's decision to take the half-a-mile trail down to the lake side of the park. This led to the most impressive view of the park with 20-foot-high cliffs and sailboats on the lake. Picture perfect. Overall, that puts this park in a net positive, ranking it 41st out of 54. 40. Lake Wapello. These parks were so hard to rank. I looked at my rankings from over a year ago, and I was like, how did I ever get it down to this exact order? All of these lakes are especially super close. Lake Wapello State Park is 1,150 acres of land 20 miles east of Honey Creek. I can think of two reasons why this park was in the E tier and not higher. First, the route there was very convoluted. If you wanted to take paved roads all the way there, you had to drive 3/4 of the way around the park. From US Highway 34, the park is 14 miles as the crow flies, but along the roads, it's close to 26 miles. The other point against the park was the poor trail routing decision on the southwestern edge of the park. Whoever decided they should route a trail out of the woods and on the edge of a cattle field should not be making those decisions. Anyways, that was a very minor part of my 7.2 mile hike. The reason a lot of these parks rank in the E tier is because while they're all good, there's simply so many dammed up creek parks in Iowa that I have to dock points for lack of originality. On to the good parts. Almost all of the trails in this park were well maintained, and the campground was hopping. I think it was 4th of July weekend. There were two standout points of the park. There's a bridge over the lake in the northwest corner of the park, which the landscape was cool. You could see some bedrock in that area, which you could walk out on a natural rock formation into the lake a little bit as well. The shining star of this park, however, is the clubhouse/event center. Not even 10,000 people live in Davis County, and this park has the best looking event center out of any of the state parks. It would be an impressive place to hold a wedding out in the middle of nowhere. There's a proper interior on the second floor and boat storage on the first floor. The entire area near the clubhouse was well designed and thought out, and it just looks nice, something you wouldn't expect from one of the poorest counties in Iowa. 39. Lake Keomah. Lake Keomah, like the last two parks, also lies in the southeast Iowa region. It is yet another dammed up creek, yet much smaller than the previous two at 366 acres. I always describe it as Oskaloosa State Park because of its proximity to the town. Nothing super remarkable about this park, but nothing super bad either. There are plenty of houses lie just outside the park boundary on the lake's eastern shore. The trail runs right in front of the houses along the lake shore. You feel like you're trespassing, but you aren't. The park also has a very small wooden bridge over the spillway instead of a DNR one made with wooden planks and metal. The park contains a 3-mile trail along the lake, and that's pretty much it. It has a shelter with a nice view of the lake on the peninsula, another typical man-made lake park in southern Iowa. 38. Lake Darling. Continuing in the southeast, we travel 35 miles east to Lake Darling. Lake Darling is 1,400 acres and has a lot of trails. When I took my friend there, we only had time to do a quarter of them. The trail around the lake is 10 miles, with the remaining trails giving the park a total of 16 miles of trails. This was one of the busiest parks we went to as well. The beach on the other side of the lake would have made you think we weren't in a pandemic. The trails were by no means dead either. I really liked the trail signs at every intersection that this park had as well. You would get to an intersection and it would tell you how far to get to the next trail or point of interest. When we turned around on the trail, it said 2.5 miles to the dam. I wish more Iowa state parks had these type of signs. The park also had a set of bridges out to an island in the middle of the lake, which was pretty unique. Overall, this park was decent. Luckily, we brought bug spray to combat the amount of bugs we encountered. 37. Lake of Three Fires. Now we head 150 miles west to the other side of Interstate 35. Lake of Three Fires State Park truly requires some backcountry roads to get to. Nothing super remarkable about this park when it comes to natural features, but the park has something in common with Lake Darling and is actually a step up. Instead of having trail info signs with mileages at each intersection, Lake of Three Fires actually has trail maps at each intersection. I genuinely wish all Iowa state parks had this. It helped me so much with doing the 5-mile route that I wanted to do through the park. The park also had a set of interesting landscapes to the north and south. Most of these parks would either be fully forested or in a fully prairie landscape. At the north end of the park, it's about half and half. The trees are there, but they're scattered throughout the field and mostly away from the trail, only in clumps of less than 10. Lake of Three Fires State Park is 1,150 acres and has 12 miles of trails. It has plenty of options when it comes to picking a trail route through the park. 36. Viking Lake. Heading 45 minutes northwest, we arrive at Viking Lake, another park in Iowa's southwest region. The park is exactly 1,000 acres and contains 7.5 miles of trails. The main trail is around the lake and is 6.3 miles. I think I went there on a weekend and the campground was hopping. When I went there, they were also doing some sort of lake treatment process, so the water was really low and resulted in a small patch of grassy marshland surrounding the lake. I quite like that, actually. This was the final park I did before doing the final 5 parks on the western border of the state, so it was kind of a milestone. The park also rounds out the E tier, so every park I mention from here on out is D tier or above. 35. Lewis and Clark. Speaking of the western border of the state, Lewis and Clark is the second of 5 parks that fall into the Luss Hills region of the state. 5 parks lie within this region, with 2 being on the Missouri River floodplain and 3 in the hills. Lewis and Clark is the second of 2 in the floodplain, with the other being Lake Manawa. Lewis and Clark State Park is situated on Blue Lake, an oxbow lake of the Missouri River. The park is 176 acres and takes up about half of the area surrounding the inner arc of the lake. While there is only 1 mile of trail inside the park, another mile extends outside the park into the west, which I did. The Missouri alluvial plain plays a big role in the hiking experience at this park. The alluvium makes the park trails surprisingly sandy, and having been to Florida a number of times, I describe it as a Florida state park in Iowa. The trails take you through the woods and near the lake. Overall, nothing super special. The park has a visitor center and a short observation tower overlooking the lake as well. 34. Union Grove. The East Metro region of my regions map only contains 2 parks, the least of any region. Rock Creek was the first one, this is the second. Union Grove State Park is 282 acres and has 2.5 miles of trails. The trails are split in 2, with the North Trail and the South Trail. I initially went there and planned on doing just the North Trail because it was longer, and I did that, but the road out of the park took me near the South Trail that had a waterfall, so I had to stop. It turned out to be the best decision of my day, with the man-made waterfall being the most interesting thing that the Dammed Up Creek Park had to offer. Me and my dad went back there on the way to another state park later on, and saw some baby geese try to follow their mother up the waterfall, with no such luck. It was also a fun wildlife viewing experience. Union Grove was my 10th state park I had covered on the journey, and the furthest I had driven to myself. It felt like quite an accomplishment, because I had no idea if I would succeed with the 54 parks at this point. 33. Fort Defiance. We returned to the Great Lakes region once more. Fort Defiance State Park is located in Estherville, Iowa, about 10 miles east of the Okoboji area. The park is just over 220 acres of wooded bluffs to School Creek, which flows directly into the Des Moines River. The bugs were really what cost this park points, with the trails being well kept and connected. The park clocks over just 6 mile trails, and we probably did about 3 of them. All were near the east end of the park. The area down by the creek was heavily wooded, a foreign sight for northwest Iowa. This was the second park we did when we set out on a day trip to cover all 7 parks in the Great Lakes region, 5 of which we've discussed so far. 32. Black Hawk. Looking at these rankings now, I'm a little confused as to how some parks fell where they did, but here we are. Black Hawk State Park is located in the north central Iowa region and is composed of a campground, 86 acres, and 2 miles of trails. The trails took me through a marshy area near the southwestern shore of Black Hawk Lake, and they were quite peaceful. I think the main reason this park ranked 32nd was that this was on the same day I had visited Twin Lakes State Park, a park that ranked in the bottom 3. I must have compared the 2 parks. While this park was vastly better, I'm not sure if it deserves 32nd. One fun fact about this park is that it's located on the southernmost glacial lake in Iowa. Another reason I can think of as to why this park ranked so high was the route I took to get home from it. U.S. Highway 71 between Carroll and Dedham is one of the most underrated roads in Iowa. Rolling hills, hay bales, and spaced picture perfectly, and windmills dominating the sky. I was in awe. If you live in Iowa, you should definitely take this drive at one point. It's right between White Rock Conservancy and Carroll. A good day trip. 31. Elk Rock. This park's proximity to Des Moines makes me surprised it's not more crowded. It's an awesome piece of land. This park is located on the southern shore of Lake Red Rock, a reservoir formed by the damming of the Des Moines River. The park is 850 acres and contains 7 miles of trails. It is also home to a popular campground and boat ramp. I've done all 7 miles of trails here in the 3 or 4 times I've been here. The East Trail is by far the longest at 4 miles, and it gives you some good space from the rest of the park's amenities and some peace and quiet. The North Trail takes you out between the campground and the boat ramp, and the West Trail leads you out to the boat ramp area, which has an awesome view of the lake and the bridge. I can see why Lake Red Rock is popular with boaters. First of all, it's giant. It's the largest lake in Iowa. Second, I'm pretty sure the DNR regularly stocks it with fish, making it prime fishing territory. And third, you can boat right up to the things that give the lake its name, the Red Rock Cliffs. 30. Mini-Wakan. This is the smallest park that ranked this high in the list. Mini-Wakan State Park is only 20 acres and contains no trails, but the park's location is one of the best in the state. First, it is the only state park that you have to drive outside of Iowa to get to, with the road to get to it being in Minnesota. This also makes it the northernmost state park in Iowa. The park is located on Big Spirit Lake, the largest natural glacial lake in Iowa. Not only that, 1/3 of the shoreline on Spirit Lake is owned by the DNR, giving the park a much more natural feel than any of the parks on West Okoboji or East Okoboji Lake. The cherry on top of this park is the 125-foot dock that extends out into the lake. While we were there were some people who had docked their fishing boat and were eating lunch. We went down to the dock, and the water was the clearest I had ever seen in Iowa. The water was probably 8 to 10 feet deep, and I could see all the way to the bottom. Not only that, there were some massive fish in the lake right off the dock. This is by far the best small Iowa state park. 29. Gull Point. We are finishing out the Great Lakes region at rank 29. The best park in the region is Gull Point, and one of the only parks in the Okoboji area with a decent trail system. Gull Point is 195 acres and had 2 miles of trails. The entirety of the trail system is interpretive, so we grabbed a pamphlet and followed along. We've encountered a chapel in the woods, some unique plants as well. It was a perfect thing to end our day at Okoboji before grabbing a bite to eat and heading for Lake Park. This park was the only park in the Okoboji area that felt like a state park. All the other parks felt like city parks. 28. Ambrose A Call. Rounding out the good parks and the D tier, we have Ambrose A Call State Park, a 130-acre park in Kossuth County. The park actually lies just outside of the town of Algona on the East Des Moines River. The park has 2 miles of trails, which was the main reason why it didn't rank higher. This park was if you took Fort Defiance State Park and got rid of the bugs. The two are strikingly similar, bar the fact that Fort Defiance has 3 times the trail mileage. I was thoroughly impressed with this small forest park in north central Iowa. Most of the trails were in the creek valley, and the whole hike felt very sheltered. I think another reason this park ranked so high was because of the weather in Des Moines that day. It was gloomy when I left in the morning, and it was a perfectly sunny day at the park. When I got back into Polk County, it was downpouring. I was happy to drive my way out of the gloomy weather and into the good weather for a hike. 27. Geode. Geode State Park is 1,641 acres in Henry County, just east of Burlington. It is the furthest park from Des Moines that is located in the southeast Iowa region. Geode has 6.5 miles of trails, with the vast majority of them being made up of the Lake Trail, which circles the lake. The funny thing about Geode, though, is the lake actually wasn't a lake when we went there. It was just a pit of grass with Flint Creek flowing through the bottom of it. The DNR drained the lake for cleaning purposes, as the frequent use of the lake by boaters had caused lots of unwanted chemicals to build up in it. This made the park unique in my opinion, though. If the lake wasn't drained, the park might have ranked somewhere in the mid-30s, because that's where other similar parks ranked. It would have just been another lake park, but the drained lake put it slightly higher. Besides that, the park was pretty standard. It did have dirt trails instead of grass or paved ones, which is something I noticed that higher parks had in common. 26. George Wyth. From there, we traveled 2.5 hours north to the Waterloo-Cedar Falls area. Here we find George Wyth State Park, one of 2 parks situated on the Cedar River, and the lowest park ranked in the northeast Iowa region. This 800-acre park functions as a giant recreation complex for the 100,000 people that live in the Waterloo-Cedar Falls area. The park has 10 miles of trails, a campground, a beach, and boat ramps for the 4 lakes that can be accessed from within the park. My dad and I came to this park. We wound up doing about 3 miles of hiking there, mostly in the western third of the park. Floodplains make great space for parks because you can't build many structures on them, and they're easy access points for nature. That's why this park was enjoyable. The things that caused this park not to rank higher is simply that the parks above it had more interesting natural features than this one. 25. Springbrook. Springbrook State Park is the lowest ranking park in the western Iowa region. It is a 920-acre park located on the Middle Raccoon River and has about 6 miles of trails. This park might have been higher if I had studied the map a little more before going. This was my 6th park, so I was still pretty new to the whole state parks thing. I actually accidentally parked at the Education Center entrance instead of the main entrance, so I didn't have access to the trails I wanted. Nonetheless, I started hiking, and in about 2 miles I got down to the lake. Unfortunately, by that time I had to turn around because it was getting a little dark, but I at least made it. I initially wanted to loop the lake and do the fire trail through the woods, which sadly I didn't get to because I entered through the wrong entrance. I still saw most of the park, though. This park, like George Wyth, didn't rank as high because the natural features in the park just weren't as good as the others. That'll be the theme with a lot of the parks ranked in the 20s and high teens. 24. Lake Ahquabi. Lake Ahquabi initially impressed me because I had no idea Iowa had man-made lake parks like many of the southeastern states. This was back in 2019. Now I know that there are almost 20 in the entire state. This park has 5 miles of trails and is 770 acres, with most of the trails being the 4-mile lake loop. This park's proximity to Des Moines was also part of the reason it got a higher rank than some of the lake parks, and that it had dirt trails. It's the 4th closest park to my house in Des Moines, and it only takes half an hour to drive to. I frequent it. The park has a good mix of where the people are, with the campground and the beach being at the north end of the lake. It's usually busy, but not crowded. Once you get about half a mile south of all that, though, it's a completely different park, and you feel like you're the only one there. The south end of the lake is quite peaceful, and I always hike south first when I get to the park. I've caught an impressive sunset here as well. 23. Red Haw. Another unique lake park, and when I say unique, I mean it this time. The park is called Red Haw for a reason. First, the park is a shade under 650 acres with 5 miles of trails. A 4-mile loop around the lake with 2 different segments one can take on one side, one down by the shore and one up away from the lake. The redbud trees are what give the park its name, though. While these are sprinkled throughout the Iowa state parks here and there, this park is known for them because they surround the lake. Late April is a prime time to see them in full color, and they give the landscape a totally pink color. I've seen lots of wildlife at this park too, deer, turtles, and bluebirds. Unlike other parks, this park does have a prime time block to go, and that is part of the reason why it's unique. 22. 9 Eagles. Iowa's southernmost state park clocks in at rank 22. 9 Eagles State Park is 1,100 acres of land, and at its southernmost point is only 3/4 of a mile from the Missouri border. This park honestly has the whole package. It has 11 miles of trails, several creeks, a lake, a spillway, not to mention the campground and boat ramp. I was initially confused when I entered the park because it had several signs and they all read different things, but I eventually figured out that day hikers were meant to park in the grassy area in the middle of the campground. From there, I started my 6-mile journey. It had rained the entirety of the previous day, so the endeavor was pretty muddy, but I didn't mind. I followed the north trail from the campground along the park's northern boundary until it got to the southwesternmost point on the trail. I thought it would connect to the lake trail, but it didn't. I wasn't about to walk multiple miles back, so I ventured into the brush. I could actually see the lake from the trail, so it was just a matter of getting down a hill and hopping the creek. Surprisingly, the mud wasn't much of a factor here, mainly because the ground was covered in leaves. I succeeded and continued west along the lake trail to encounter another surprise. This was one of the only parks that didn't have a bridge over the spillway. I had to hike down below the spillway to get an accessible point to cross. Also, you know how it rained the previous day? That means the spillway was roaring. Like, that thing was so loud. I made it to the bottom and rock hopped my way across the creek and climbed back up onto the dam. I actually liked that park. It was unique. I continued my way around the lake, eventually making it back to the car. If you couldn't tell, I had vivid memories of this park, which might be why it ranked higher than some. 21. Green Valley. I'm surprised this park ranked as high as it did, because it significantly frustrated me. I had to make 2 attempts at it. Green Valley State Park is a 990-acre park in Union County and has 9 miles of trails, all circling the lake. I initially went to do the whole 9-mile loop, which was an incredibly naive decision looking back on it, as that would have doubled my distance for any park at that time. I got there, and the unpaved trails around the lake were almost non-existent as well, so instead of just doing the paved trails, I took my 5 pictures and filled up with gas and headed home. The next day came around and I had a bee in my bonnet about this park, so I developed a new plan. I would fill up with gas before I left so it wouldn't worry me as much, and then I would do a short segment of the paved trail when I got to the park. The lake is awesome, and it is the reason this is the highest ranked park in the southwest Iowa region. It seems like quite a popular place for the people of Creston too, being located just north of the town. Overall, the pictures show the park's atmosphere and environment a justice, putting it just outside of the top 20. 20. Prairie Rose. Breaking into the top 20 and rounding out the C tier, we have Prairie Rose State Park. This park is over 650 acres and includes a lake. The prairie landscape of this park is the main reason why this park ranked into the top 20. Iowa is a Great Plains state, and I like to see that the parks reflect that. The park has 5.6 miles of trail, most of them being along the north side of the lake. There's no lake loop in this park, and the hike I did was out to the dam and back. The park does have a boardwalk trail, which is unique because no other Iowa state park has that. 19. Banner Lakes at Summerset. As the highest ranked park in the central metro region, Banner Lakes at Summerset State Park is a park I go to the most often. It's a 222-acre park that lies just south of Des Moines in Warren County. The park has about 5 miles of trails and is a nice escape from traditional flat Iowa. This is because the park actually used to be a coal mine. This can be seen in the gray-colored ground and the steep grades found in the park. The park actually has 2 lakes, a North Lake and a South Lake, with most of the trails being on the North Lake. The trail actually takes you out onto islands in the middle of the lake, which is pretty unique. The trail around the North Lake is 3 miles, which is perfect for a hike to do frequently. Banner Lakes is also the newest state park in Iowa, being established in 2002. I've seen my fair share of wildlife in the park, from deer to turtles to frogs to bobcats to owls. Overall, this park is a hidden gem that shouldn't be overlooked when looking at places to hike in the Des Moines metro. 18. Beeds Lake. This park also gets overlooked, especially since I've given the north central Iowa region a bad rap. There are 10 parks in the region, and they can't all be bad. This is one of the good ones. Beeds Lake is a man-made lake in a 319-acre park about half an hour south of Mason City. While I've labeled man-made lake parks as unoriginal in the past, this one is different in a lot of ways. First, the park is located in an area that was recently glaciated, which means the shoreline is less than dendritic than some of the lake parks in southern Iowa, which also makes the lake seem more natural. Second, the lake has two prominent features to make it unique, a causeway and a spillway. The causeway cuts right across the lake on the west side and isn't something you would expect to see from such a small lake. You may be asking, what's so unique about a spillway in a man-made lake park? Well, it's definitely the most beautiful spillway in any Iowa state park by a lot. I've seen people jumping off of it and swimming in a pool at the bottom of it. It's awesome. Not only that, it offers a different atmosphere in the southeast corner of the park because you have to hike down the hill and cross the creek at the bottom of the spillway in the woods. This is why this park ranked in the top 20. Hidden gem just east of Interstate 35. 17. Lake Anita. I had been wanting to go to this park since before the mission started, and boy did it meet expectations. At rank 17, it is the highest ranked park in the western Iowa region. While it is a lake park in unglaciated Iowa, the prairie landscape, the wildlife, and the isolation of the park make it all worth it. I like man-made lakes a lot more if they aren't in a forest landscape. Interestingly enough, this 1,000-acre park has a 4.5-mile paved trail running the entire perimeter of the lake, and believe it or not, it makes the park more appealing. The trail is the only trail in the park, making hiking decisions easy. Not only is the atmosphere and hiking nice, but the amount of wildlife I've seen here is astounding. I've seen deer, ducks, snails, unique birds like the eastern goldfinch, frogs, turtles, and on my most recent visit, I saw swans for the first time ever in the wild. Overall, these factors all combined into making this park the second best park in Iowa, where the main feature was a lake. There are other parks with lakes, but only one park to rank higher that had the lake as its main feature. 16. Pine Lake. This is the park I just mentioned. Pine Lake State Park actually has two lakes. Lower Pine Lake and Upper Pine Lake are two man-made lakes located on the 585-acre piece of land that is Pine Lake State Park. This park feels like it belongs in Minnesota. The area around the lake is so densely forested that you wouldn't think you were in north central Iowa. The park has 6 miles of trails, all of them beautiful, with some taking you along the Lower Pine Lake and some leading you along the Iowa River. The 3 parks below this always felt special to me for some reason, and I tried to rank this one lower than them, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. The park truly came out of nowhere when I was ranking the 54. The little things were why this park edged them out. The walkways on the south side of the lake remind me of the trails in Superior National Forest in northern Minnesota. Yet somehow I was in Iowa. It's an easy park to miss, but I highly recommend, especially if you live in Marshalltown. 15. Lake Macbride. Before I get to talking about this park, I want to talk about the consistency in the eastern Iowa region. Notice how not a single one of the parks I've discussed so far has lied in that region. That will give you an idea of how insanely consistent the area of the state is for hiking in state parks. Lake Macbride is the lowest ranked park in this region, and it is in the top 15. Genuinely insane. Not only that, it is the only park in the region that is considered B tier by me as well. Every other park is A tier or above. Lake Macbride is the second largest state park in Iowa at 2,810 acres. It contains 14 miles of trails on 3 different sides of the lake. This does hinder accessibility a little bit, as you may have to drive around the lake to get between trailheads. But for what this park has to offer, it is a minor inconvenience. This park exceeded expectations for me because of the day I went. I went to this park on a Saturday, leaving me concerned about crowds. I decided beforehand I was going to do the field campus trails on the south side of the lake, and that was the best decision I had ever made. I encountered almost no one on the trails. Lake Macbride's spillway is also an impressive one, with a giant rock being carved away to make a rocky surface for water to exit the lake into the Iowa River, with the actual outflow being dammed up. I did about 4 miles of hiking here, all of them amazing. I imagine this park is a hit with the University of Iowa students. 14. Lacey-Keosauqua. Rounding out our B tier, we have Lacey-Keosauqua State Park. Lacey-Keosauqua was actually Iowa's second state park ever, and it also ranks as the best in the southeast Iowa region of our map. Lacey-Keosauqua is a 1,653-acre park with more than 7 miles of trails. Not only that, the trail system also links up to Shimmick State Forest's trail system, adding to the total mileage of trails that can be accessed from the park. The park was originally called Big Bend Park because of its location at the bend in the Des Moines River. The Mormons also crossed the Des Moines River here. I hiked the 2.6-mile segment along the river and back for a 5.2-mile hike. There were some awesome views of the Des Moines River on this trail, and the park also contains a small lake in the southern part which I never got a chance to explore. The most impressive part of the river was near the western terminus, where the land rose 40 to 50 feet above the river very quickly, leading to exceptional views. 13. Dolliver Memorial. The A tier. This is where parks start really getting good. Dolliver Memorial State Park is a 600-acre park in Webster County on the Des Moines River. This is where Ledges State Park would rank if it didn't have all the people. Dolliver Memorial is basically a copy of Ledges State Park that is further up the Des Moines River and half the size. The park has 4 main loops of trails, which total about 6 miles. The park has its fair share of natural features among the bluffs as well. The copperas beds are a rock cliff on the edge of Prairie Creek, and follow the trail up the hill to get some hilltop prairies on the western edge of the park. The best trail in the park by far is the Boneyard Trail. The trail follows the rim of a rock canyon before descending into it. It's not Iowa-like inside the canyon at all. You're surrounded by rock on basically all sides, with a small creek running through the bottom. I followed the canyon out before returning to the car. More people should really know about this park. It's just as good as Ledges and is only about a 40-minute drive from Ames and 20 minutes from Fort Dodge. If the crowds at Ledges were more evenly distributed between Ledges and Dolliver Memorial, both parks would be a lot better. 12. Maquoketa Caves. This might be Iowa's most unique state park. The park has over 6 miles of trails, 13 different caves to explore, and is 323 acres. The most interesting cave by far is the Dance Hall Cave. If you exit the parking lot on the north side and descend into the creek valley, you first see a natural bridge, a giant rock bridge that you can walk under, and you will also see some boardwalks along the cliffs. After going under the natural bridge, there is a set of stairs up to the road and a set of stairs down into the Dance Hall Cave. This cave takes you under the road for about half a mile until you reach the other side with its 10 or so caves. If it's 80 degrees outside, it's 55 in the cave and 65 near the cliffs and natural bridge. The rock is really a good insulator for heat. If you go over the road, you will descend 3 flights of stairs back into the creek valley where the Dance Hall Cave comes out. This is actually where you can follow the trail south to explore other caves, which are significantly smaller. You can choose to follow the creek valley until the trail turns around, but also can go up the hills on either side and walk along the top of the cliffs on the way back. Some of them have great views of the playground that is Maquoketa Caves State Park. While this park may seem incredible, and it was, there were a few drawbacks of it. First, the caves are almost always closed. I only got to go into the Dance Hall Cave last summer when we visited when it was open. Lots of aspects of this park are often closed, which causes a second problem, crowds. Whenever the caves are open, everyone capitalizes on it and goes to the park. It makes the park feel like a zoo sometimes, with people milling around everywhere. These were the 2 reasons that kept this park from making the top 10. 11. Cedar Rock. This also might be Iowa's most unique state park. The technicality comes in when taking this park into account. I was going to every DNR piece of land that ended in state park. This one didn't end in anything, and it was just called Cedar Rock. So I went to Google Maps. On Google Maps, it was called Cedar Rock State Park. So there we have it, another park to visit. This has now become my procedure when planning other states out. If a piece of land doesn't end in state blank, I go to Google Maps to see what it is called. I just checked now on the DNR sites, it actually is listed as Cedar Rock State Park now. Cedar Rock is 423 acres in Buchanan County and it has a little over a mile of trails. The only trail in the park leads from the visitor center to the main feature of the park, a house designed by Frank Lloyd Wright himself. The house is situated on a limestone bluff in front of the Wapsipinicon River, and the property also contains a boathouse. I went to this park with my dad, and we arrived an hour early for our tour, so we walked the trail and property while we waited. It was a good thing we did, too, as the tour only gave you 10 minutes to explore the place after you finished. You really needed more than 20 to explore the whole property. The house is amazing inside, with the garden room being the main feature. The room is surrounded on 3 or 4 sides by windows and overlooks the river. The coolest piece of it is that the plants in the living room are planted directly into the cracks in the limestone bluff, so no extra layer of floor needed to be built for plants. And there was no mess of dirt either. The kitchen and 2 bedrooms were all down a small hallway leading out of the garden room, and a room for maid is separate from the house on the other side of the carport. Wright built this house on request from one of his friends, Lowell Walter, and the couple used it as a 3-seasons home until they died. They had requested the property go to the DNR after he and his wife passed, which is how the site became a state park. Definitely my most unique state park visit, and the only one with a guided tour. The house was beautiful, and my dad said he could spend all day in the garden room. The Wapsipinicon River was really high when we visited as well, and the water was up to the steps of the boathouse. Our tour guide said the boathouse was Lowell's man cave whenever he felt he needed to get away from his wife. It was complete with a bedroom and a balcony on the upper floor. 10. Preparation Canyon. We enter the top 10. Preparation Canyon State Park is a 344-acre park adjacent to the Loess Hills State Forest in western Iowa. The park has 5 miles of trails and is home to some of the most rugged hiking in Iowa. This is the only state park that offers hike and camping. I parked at the hike and camping entrance and did a somewhat clockwise loop of the park. On this map, the dividing line for rugged versus easy hiking is campsite number 8. All trails west of this have steep inclines and look barely touched, while trails east of this are well established and have gradual slopes. I did about 3.5 miles of hiking here, and the best part was at the end, hiking the easternmost trail on the crest of the hill overlooking the Soldier River Valley. Considering the size of this park, this is one to combine into a day trip with some state forest trails or county parks as well. The park is amazing by itself, and its proximity to other recreation areas makes it even better. 9. Palisades-Kepler. Palisades-Kepler State Park is an 840-acre park just east of Cedar Rapids. The park has 3 miles of trails, with the main features being the rock outcroppings and bluffs on the Cedar River. These palisades can reach up to 75 feet high in some places, giving hikers great views of the river. The CCC originally designated about 400 acres along the river to be parkland to preserve the Palisades, and with another 400-acre donation by Lewis Kepler, who owned land adjacent to the park, we see the park as it is today. Poet Carl Sandburg also frequented the park whenever he visited Cornell College in Mount Vernon as well. I'm so glad I got to go to this park when it was open, because after I'd finished the 54, a windstorm called the derecho swept across central and eastern Iowa, causing lots of damage to anywhere there was trees. Many state parks closed for a week or more during the cleanup, like Rock Creek, Lake Macbride, and Big Creek, but the damage was so extensive at Palisades-Kepler that they closed for over a year, not reopening until September of 2021. If the derecho had come a month earlier, I would have been totally screwed on my mission to 54 parks. 8. Wapsipinicon. If you want to go to all 54 state parks but only have time to visit one, this is the one to hit. This 390-acre park on the Wapsipinicon River has every landscape you can find in Iowa. This park has 4 miles of trails. There are 2 miles of trails through a prairie landscape you would find in western Iowa, a mile of trails through a white pine forest, something hardly found in Iowa at all, and a little more than a mile of trails through a deciduous forest found in northeast Iowa. This park has a creek, rock faces, a cave, and of course the typical attached golf course. The park is genuinely one of the best pieces of land the Iowa DNR owns. Me and my mom went there when I did this park, and we hiked the prairie trails clockwise, then we zigzagged our way through the rest of the trails heading north through the pine forest and south along the creek to the cave. This is where we turned around. But walking the trails along the creek was like waking a sleeping army of dragonflies. We would take one step, and 5 would take off. Would recommend to anyone in eastern Iowa. 7. Backbone. The top of the A tier. This is it. Backbone is 2,000 acres on a man-made lake from the Maquoketa River near its headwaters. The park is similar to Wapsipinicon and Maquoketa Caves in that there are plenty of limestone outcroppings throughout the park. I've been to this park twice, once with my mom and once with my dad, and we did the same hike both times. We drove up the road with the cabins and parked at the end of it. We took the trail down and northwest along the lake until we got to the Backbone parking area. The main feature of this park is called the Devil's Backbone and is a high, rocky, bridge-like formation near the bend in the Maquoketa River. You hike out onto it, loop around the south part, and turn back around. This is when we headed back the same way we had come. This was actually Iowa's first state park, established in 1919 and dedicated in 1920, and is one of the DNR's most prized possessions. The park has 10 miles of trails and 17 miles of trails if you include the attached Backbone State Forest. The combination of the amount of trails, geographic diversity, and location were enough to elevate this park to the top of the A tier, 7th. 6. Wildcat Den. This park likely rose to the bottom of S tier because of not only the landscape and geography, but because of the person I hiked it with as well. Wildcat Den State Park is 423 acres along Pine Creek in Muscatine County, just north of the bend in the Mississippi River. I hiked the 4-mile loop with my friend and section leader from marching band, Will. Will was my favorite person to hike with out of all the people I hiked with. The circumstances when we went were also really good. It was initially forecasted to rain all day when I looked the day before, but I checked the radar all morning the day we went, and it looked very promising. Another thing I was also worried about with this park was the crowds. It was situated right between Davenport and Muscatine, meaning a lot of people would likely show up on a nice day. Luckily, a lot of people probably thought it would rain, which likely lessened the crowds by a lot. We only encountered one group while we were hiking and a few more groups when we were heading out. It was kind of a hot one, 85 degrees. Luckily, the park was almost entirely shaded. We hiked along the Pine Creek Trail and followed the cliffs north to the Fat Man's Squeeze. We then followed the perimeter trail around the edge of the park to get back to the Devil's Punch Bowl. This was by far the coolest part of the entire hike. It was 85 outside, it was probably 75 in the Punch Bowl. The Punch Bowl is a giant creek valley surrounded by rock outcroppings and overhangs. Trails everywhere. We explored the whole area for about 15 minutes before getting back on the trail back to the car. When I did the park rankings, I was very surprised that this park ranked as high as it did. I expected it to be top 15, but not 6th. 5. Stone. We start the top 5 with Iowa's westernmost state park. Stone State Park is a little over 1,000 acres on the Big Sioux River at the north edge of Sioux City in the Luss Hills. The park has 11.6 miles of trails, and I did 9.2 of them. This park is a really easy one to get lost in because there's no cell reception and some of the trail signs are wrong. Be sure to have a screenshot of a map on your phone when you go. Vista points are my biggest criteria when visiting parks, and this park was not short of them at all. Both the first and last vista points I approached were of 3 states, Iowa in front of you, South Dakota in the foreground, and Nebraska in the background. This park had probably some of the best park roads out of any of the parks as well. They wind through the forested hills perfectly. Most of the good trails in this park are towards the south end, and most of the ones on the north end connect up with roads all the time, and it's hard to get away from them. I got lost a bunch of times, which might have been what pushed this park out of the top 3, but I found my way eventually. Overall, this is an impressive park in the Loess Hills and would definitely recommend to anyone in the area. 4. Pikes Peak. I went to a similar park a few days prior, and I really liked it, so much so that I expected Pikes Peak to be the top spot. I was mistaken. Pikes Peak State Park is just shy of 1,000 acres in Clayton County. The park has 10.6 miles of trails, and we did 9.7 of them, the most of any state park in Iowa. The park's location in the driftless area makes it an incredible landscape. Not only that, it is located on the other side of the Wisconsin River Delta, which means that the park is 500 feet high on a bluff looking over a river valley that is flanked by other 500-foot bluffs. It's impressive. Me and my dad hiked here first northward along the back ridge and southward along the front. We found wild strawberries on the back ridge, and they were delicious. Most of the impressive views are near the parking area, but that didn't keep us from hiking a lot. Now, a few things that held this park back. First, the weather. It was overcast when we went, and I'm used to seeing the Mississippi River in the sunlight. This might be why the park views look less appealing than some of the other ones, too. Also, the fact that it was basically all bluff on the other side with no varying terrain also made the park less visually appealing. Some Iowans might criticize me for saying these things, and I'm not trying to give Pikes Peak a bad rap. It's a top 4 park. The top 3 were just a little better. This was the highest ranked park in the Northeast Iowa region of the map, leaving 3 regions still with a park to discuss. With that being said, if you want to do a mini Iowa State Parks tour, you would definitely want to hit all the S-tier parks, as they are all relatively evenly spaced out in the state, and they are the gold standard for state parks in Iowa. 3. Bellevue. This is the other park in the driftless area. It is the similar park to Pikes Peak that I mentioned. The park is 770 acres and is made up of 2 units that have about 3 miles of trails each. The reason this park edged out Pikes Peak is that it was sunny the day that I visited, and there was more variation in the terrain when I was looking across the river. I was looking off into the hills of northeast Illinois. I did about 3 miles of hiking at the Nelson unit and a little less than that at the Dias unit. The Nelson unit is definitely the better one for views, with it being located right at the south end of the town of Bellevue. It's probably the most picturesque overlook of the Mississippi River in Iowa. Not only does it have great views, it also has a butterfly garden, which was fun to walk around. I was actually dreading making the drive out to this park because I was kind of burnt out and it was 3.5 hours. I'm so glad I did though. The park is beyond impressive. I almost made this park second, but 3 things kept me from doing it. First, I went on a Sunday, and it was quite crowded. Second, the views weren't panoramic, and by panoramic, I mean 360 degrees, like the next park I'm about to discuss. It also didn't have as many trails or connectivity between the trails. With that being said, Bellevue State Park, Iowa's easternmost state park, is definitely one to visit and is the highest ranked park in the eastern Iowa region. 2. Pilot Knob. The runner-up. Pilot Knob State Park is 528 acres in Hancock County and is the highest ranked park in the north central Iowa region on this list. If you thought I had something against north central Iowa in the beginning, this is where I prove you wrong. Me and my mom went up to the Clear Lake area to hit 4 parks: Clear Lake, Mcintosh Woods, Rice Lake, and Pilot Knob. I told her to save Pilot Knob for last because it would be the best one, and any park we went to after that would just feel like a chore. We did that, and it did not disappoint. A knob is a prominent hill in the landscape, to give you an idea of this park's main feature. We originally couldn't find the trail to reach the summit, but we actually found a dirt trail that led along the back of the hill. This was the best mistake we could have made. We followed the trail along the back of the hill and followed through some dense trees where we saw the tower poking out into the sky right in front of us. It couldn't have been more perfect. We emerged from the trees to an amazing view of quintessential Iowa, farmland and wind turbines as far as the eye could see. We ascended up the tower and got an even better view. Before I went to this park, I had no idea how I would rank them all and which one would be my favorite. I had a clear favorite now, 23 parks in. It was the perfect thing to end our day of relatively bad parks. 1. Waubonsee. The one you've all been waiting for. Iowa's southwesternmost state park is the best state park in the Loess Hills region and tops the list of 54 Iowa state parks. This park has only about 4 miles of hiking trails, but the main 2 miles of the Sunset Ridge Trail are the best 2 miles of hiking in Iowa. Looking westward, you can see the Missouri River floodplain right down below you with Nebraska in the background. The park is 1,247 acres in the warmest county in Iowa, Fremont County. Because of this warmth and relative dryness, there are some things in this park you can't find in any other. Yucca is the first example. Most people think of yucca as primarily a plant found in the southwestern United States, but yucca can be found in Waubonsee State Park. The most interesting species that can only be found in Waubonsee, however, is the prairie race runner, the only lizard I'd ever seen in Iowa. These things are incredibly fast, and we'll try to make sure you don't see them, which is likely easier along the more forested Mississippi River, where they can also be found. Because the Missouri River side of the state is more grassland, it can easily be more spotted. Truly a unique sight. Vista points are always my main interest in Iowa state parks, and the Sunset Ridge Trail is like half Vista. The trail is a square running westward into a creek valley and ascending onto the ridge. Northward along the ridge, this is all Vista from south to north. Truly incredible views. Then it completes the square by running east and south. Truly unparalleled park I would absolutely recommend. This is my full ranking of the 54 state parks in Iowa, and if you disagree with them, I'm proud of you for going to all the state parks in Iowa. That's one of my favorite things about ranking obscure things like this. People have to take your word for it, because almost no one knows about the entire scope of the topic. This is a little different than the MCC videos that I usually post, but this is my channel and I make the rules. To be honest, I just make videos to fill my own time. I don't care how many views they get or anything like that. My goal is to get a significantly shorter video out about the South Dakota state parks uploaded a week from when this video is. We'll see if that happens or not. I also plan to do a video on the Minnesota state parks at the end of the summer when I've visited all of them.